Ready? Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 116 of the Citrix session. I'm your host, Andy Whiteside. I've got Bill Sutton, the Director of Delivery Services here at XenTegra. Bill, if I'm not mistaken, in our management meeting a few minutes ago, you reported that you guys had 115% utilization last week? Or was that the week before?
Week before last, yes.
Okay, so there's no such thing as giving 110%, right? But I guess when your consultants
40 hours a week, that's over 100%, right? If you consider 40 the floor.
When your consultants for project rollouts have to work nights and weekends during a week, I guess you can do more than the whole.
You can.
Yeah, good problem to have. Now, why are you guys so busy?
Well, selling a lot of projects, a lot of migrations off of 715. Believe it or not, that's a lot of the work that we're doing internally, as well as a lot of customers are really trending towards leveraging agile. We've got a couple of really big agile projects that are rolling out UMS and ICG and other agile technologies to optimize the endpoint that accesses a Citrix or VMware environment.
Interesting.
Environment, I should say.
Scanning through the blog for today, I saw a lot of comments around Linux. Agile is really just Linux for the endpoint, but that story's been around for a long time. I guess people are just starting to really understand the I don't need Windows for my endpoints to connect the Windows in the data center or cloud conversation.
Yeah, I think a lot of that goes back to the pandemic and driving a lot of folks to do remote work and organizations wanting to centralize what we've been preaching for years, and now they recognize the benefit of that and trying to optimize the endpoint and not having to manage all these disparate Windows systems and just manage what's in the data center. So certainly Agile lends itself to that ease of management and security on the endpoint.
Yeah, so the world of pandemic has helped. Connectivity is better than ever.
Oh, yeah.
Back-end systems are more powerful than ever and scalable both up and down, cloud, non-cloud, like we talked about last couple of weeks. We probably all saw this in the late 90s as the future, but it's starting to become the reality.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Hey, you know what? I have a couple of questions, actually, unrelated to the blog post, but everything you just said, Bill. So first things first. So 715 has been end of support, mainstreams with support. You can still get extended support if you need that with Citrix for a month and a half now.
Yes, sir.
What are you seeing? Like, why have customers waited so long to make that upgrade?
That's a really good question. I think largely it's been driven by they didn't have the ability to either didn't have staffing ability to manage it, or more likely what we're seeing is they got so busy keeping it in production and they didn't want to touch it until they had kind of a slowdown, as it were. So a lot of customers have just simply said, this is working for us. It's become critical to our business, more critical perhaps than it was in the past. So we need to hold on to it as long as we can. And things are now starting to level off a little bit to the point where they can leverage a newer version. Of course, all of these, as you can understand, I'm sure, Geremy, are parallel migrations. These are not in-place upgrades. We tend to shy away from in-place upgrades, frankly, but we will do them if the customer really wants them. But generally, we're going to do a parallel migration where we build a DaaS environment or even a 2203 environment in parallel, and then migrate users over, or leverage Storefront to aggregate both environments.
Okay, are you finding that customers, because we're talking about 715, what was that? Probably server 2016 when that was deployed.
2012 R2 or 2016, yes.
So customers are probably using this opportunity to refresh the OS to like
Absolutely,
2019.
yes.
Probably not 2022 yet, but definitely 2019, right? Gotcha.
2019, we'll have some customers are going to 1912. Most are going to 2203.
Got it. Okay.
They buy more time, obviously, if they go to 2203, but some are reluctant to go to the shiny new object, so to speak, even though it's not all that shiny and new anymore. It was 6 months ago. So
right. Well, there's some things in this blog post that talk about the on-prem current release and connectivity out to like Azure VDAs, cloud VDAs, things like that. And I guess they would still be relevant if you were on, or I guess 1912 would still be relevant if you have workloads sitting in 1912, connected to things out in Azure, that would still work. One of the other things I bumped into is customers that were making the 715 jump is they had workloads running in public clouds that worked just fine. with 7.15, even 19.12. But as they made the jump to 22.03, those machines quit working, or at least they quit registering because we deprecated that support. So I don't know
they had hybrid rights, I believe, right?
Unless they had hybrid rights,
yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Which is a different license file that you've got to download.
So that was the voice of Geremy Meyers, the director of sales engineers for Citrix for the East Coast.
Yeah, I got right into it, Andy. I'm sorry.
All right.
Bill got my wheels turning. I was just kind of curious.
I love it, man. That's what we do, right? And look, none of that was rocket science, but as you can imagine, these are your line of business apps running either as published apps or presented desktops with apps included. This is scary, big stuff. That's why you have a partner like XenTegra to help you in between customer and Citrix get this done and get it done right and be there to help fix the fallout if there's issues.
And speaking of, so here's another one, and it is about agile, in fact. So, I've got a customer who is looking to make a move off of VMware. And right now they have a mix of agile endpoints as well as, I think, Dell Teradici-based endpoints. So I'm not concerned about the agiles. Obviously there's a Linux VDA, a Linux Workspace app. But from a Teradici perspective, can I repurpose those guys with maybe a UD Pocket? I don't think I can install the agile OS on it, but can I repurpose with a UD Pocket and leverage that hardware, that Teradici hardware?
Maybe we would have to, number one, would it be supported? Maybe not. Does it have the hardware inside it to work? Maybe not. That's one of the problems, right? Historically, when a customer was sold a zero client, it was barely enough to power up. And only had the abilities to work with one client or one of the proposed solutions, or if it was a hardware-based solution. The Teradici ones, it was a hardware-based Teradici, right? And hardware, there's always software behind hardware, but chances are no, but it's worth taking a look at it. Here's the way I put it. If there is a solution on the market that can do it and actually be supported doing it, it would be agile.
I got it. Okay. Well, listen, I didn't mean to start this off with an Ask Me Anything, but
yeah, that's all right.
I had questions.
Well, let me do this. Our topic for today is based around a blog from Heather Tatt. We've done a couple of Heathers in the past. And this one is specifically, scroll way down. What's new with Citrix DaaS and Citrix Virtual App and Desktops, September 2022. So from now, basically. All right, Geremy, real quick. Citrix DaaS is what compared to Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop? You have to have this question all the time asked. How do you succinctly help people understand the difference between Citrix using the term DaaS for one thing and Virtual App and Desktop for the other?
So Citrix DaaS is essentially the Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops as a service. So we're hosting the management part of a Citrix solution, and Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops is a fully on-prem, fully customer IT managed or partner managed solution. So you would manage everything from the virtual delivery agents to the backend infrastructure as well. So the delivery controllers and storefront and licensing, database, the whole 9 yards.
And Bill, how many projects do we have to upgrade somebody's DaaS platform?
Not very many. That's usually pretty straightforward. It's basically the VDA unless they have on-prem access layer. So NetScaler, and storefront.
That's right, because when you move to as a service, then it's Citrix's responsibility to have their process in place to do it for you, and you ain't got to do that anymore.
Right.
That's one of the big benefits of it. There's still plenty of stuff to work on. Don't worry about that. But we don't have to worry about in-place upgrades anymore, parallel upgrades, or database migrations. Oh my God, remember those?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So that's why it's important.
So I got another one then. So I know we're still in the first paragraph, but the model with the Citrix versioning specific to the on-premises Citrix virtual, the virtual apps and desktops IT managed version is, there's a current release that comes out roughly every quarter, right? So, right now we're looking at 2209 that represents the September 2022 current release, and so that is constantly being updated. There's a version that comes out every quarter. Every 18 months, we have a long-term service release. And so that's why earlier this year, we released the 2203 long-term service release. So there's 5 years of support. The reason 715 is going into life is because we've reached that 5 years. But long story short, your upgrade process for customers who are going from current release to current release Bill, what does that typically look like?
What do you, I mean, it's pretty simple. It's an over install typically on the master image. Basically an upgrade from 2206, I guess, to 2209.
Is it in place? Are you doing parallel? In place
Most of the time we do. It depends on the customer. Obviously the smaller ones typically will allow us to do it on or we'll do it on a copy of the master image or test image. The larger ones certainly will do a parallel and do a lot of testing. They'll have the whole process of dev, test, prod, UAT, or UAT then prod, those sorts of processes.
And Bill, everybody does that in their non-production environment first, whether it's DaaS
Correct.
or Citrix Virtual App and Desktop. They all do that, right?
They all have test dev. They all have.
Oh yeah,
non-prod.
Sure. Yeah.
He's laughing. Andy's laughing because 10, 12 years ago, before I was even at Citrix, he used to socialize this, and to this day, so people don't know.
What I will highlight, if you're using DaaS, so as a service Citrix platform, you can carve off 5 or whatever amount of license you need, and you have a fighting chance of having a pre-production environment. And neither one of them do you have to production or pre-production. Do you have to manage the platform? And you can tell Citrix, hey, upgrade this one first, but don't upgrade this one last. It is just a magical world to live in. Those customers that just basically have one desktop spun off in the corner that they test all this stuff in, it's not really testing the whole platform. That'd be good enough.
Yep, you're right. All right, I promise to stop. There's some good stuff in here. Let's roll through it. I'm sorry. It will happen again.
All right, so calling out that the now available Citrix Virtual App and Desktop, and it's 2209 for Geremy. For our listeners who haven't been around this very long, 2209 is nomenclature for what?
So the 09 represents the month, and the 22 represents the year. So this would be the current release that was released in September of 2022.
Okay.
And this is typically supported for how long?
You're going to ask me that. I would say
I think it's 18 months, isn't it?
It's maybe a year and a half at most. But okay. Listen, if you're on a current release, you're looking at this list here, wondering what's new and whether or not it makes sense for me to upgrade.
Right.
But you've got that process, or you've got a partner who's walking you through the process of upgrading, because you need to do this somewhat frequently, for sure.
Yeah.
And guys, this is not a long-term service release. This is just the latest release, right?
This is the latest release. In fact, if I had to imagine, we'll see a 2212, right? So that means some kind of release in the fourth quarter as well. I'm not sure if we've got one, but we typically do. So we had a 2112. I'm sure we'll have a 2212.
Yeah. And specifically, what we're going to talk about for the next little bit is around the Citrix Virtual App and Desktop 2209 current release, which is for the on-premises platform. And by the way, if you're going to have multiple data centers involved in here, you might have 2 of these built out, aggregated behind a bunch of NetScalers and storefront servers. And Bill made the NetScaler mark pretty quick a while ago. Throw it out there, right? Citrix has gone back to using the term NetScaler to identify the application delivery controllers, and all the diehard Citrix folks from 10 to 15 years ago, 20 years ago are ecstatic that they get to use the term NetScaler again.
Yep, it's official. It's official.
All right. First section here talks about extended HDX optimizations. And let's, again, for the hardcore Citrix folks, just point out HDX is the marketing term for all the high definition stuff Citrix does. A big part of that is the protocol. So HDX protocol, I think, is really going to be part of the conversation here, if not the whole conversation. If you're talking to Geremy, Bill, or myself, and you want to use, the advanced ICA capabilities, also known as HDX, we'll know what you mean.
Yeah, what's interesting about this is the HDX piece is the piece that is primarily end user facing. This is the stuff the end user sees, right? So anything you see related to HDX usually means we're improving the user experience. And so when I look at the list of things here, so there's a couple of things that pop out. In fact, Andy, I know we're on a Zoom call, but I don't think I've ever seen your background blurred, but that's normal now. So Bill always has it. Andy sometimes does it. I don't think I've ever had it, but ultimately happens a lot. And that's not been something that has been supported. I'm going to come back to 10-bit for sure, but this one jumped out. That hasn't been supported if you're running Teams from within a virtual app, virtual desktop, the ability to blur your background. Yep. So this has been added, which I think is pretty neat, because most folks do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Most folks do it.
And Jeremy, I'll address my different setup here. So I've got a Surface tablet connect to a monitor, keyboard, mouse. Over here, I've got a Chrome OS. Over here, I've got an LG all-in-one running agile. In all the cases, I'm using Citrix Workspace to get my job done all day. I just move from device to device because I want to move around. Plus, I want to test the different use cases, including, in this case, Zoom offloading.
That's awesome. The other thing, and this might be later in the blog post here, is that actually there's more indication of whether or not so this is all predicated on you having certain things turned on, right? Do you have the version of Teams? Do you have the right Workspace app? There's a couple of things that need to be in place for it to happen, but sometimes it's hard to tell whether or not optimization has been enabled. And so I think something else later in the blog actually points it out. So we have a feature that will let you know whether or not you're optimized for your best experience with Teams, which I think is neat. A little feedback. So,
yeah.
All right, let's start at the top. 10-bit high HDR.
All right, take it. 10-bit high dynamic range HDR. What does this mean?
All right, so I'm not a huge HDR person, meaning I don't quite understand all the details, but essentially what this is it makes it look better, right? So you've got 10-bit graphics now, but high definition range, high dynamic range, which if you've ever turned this on in your TV, the color's better, the darks are darker. You just have wider range on what that viewing experience looks like. And so, we brought this into the VDA now. So this is completely supported if you're doing things like, if you got a 4K camera and you've got an HDR camera that you want to use for Teams, all of a sudden you can basically leverage that experience inside a session, which is kind of neat.
Is this on by default or you got to turn it on?
It's probably a policy, if I had to imagine, because this probably means more bandwidth. And so, that's a really big deal. But, the scenario they point out here is remote medical imaging. So, one of the use cases we've had for a long time is you've got radiologists who want to look at images. Technically, I'm gonna booger up this word here, but there's a word for whether a diagnostic read, right? So I don't know that they've been able to do quote unquote diagnostic reads through Citrix in the past, just based on the resolution requirements, but you could at least see and make maybe make a call. But I wonder if this changes that. I wonder if this is a requirement driven by just the medical industry.
Yeah. Well, if nothing else, and you asked me a while ago, hey, if you had to do this, what thin client OS could you count on being the most likely to work? Agile. If you had to do desktop virtualization and you're looking for that brokering and middleware platform, Citrix, right? Citrix has features that are still in process from the others to catch up, and then new things like this come around. You're like, oh yeah, well, why would I use anything but what's likely to solve the most challenges? While you were doing that, I pulled up the Zoom statistics, and you can tell I'm offloading it. It's got a VDI tab here, and you can see what the VDI, what the endpoint, the agile endpoint's actually doing versus the VDI itself is having to actually do.
Oh, that's pretty interesting. Actually.
So it's offloaded. All right, next one, Bill. I'll let you try this one first. Virtual channel allow list feature update.
This is a system environment variable. I'm not really sure what you would use this for, to be honest, but it's a new environment variable they've added to allow customers to streamline adding custom virtual channels. Again, I'm not sure exactly when this would be leveraged. Maybe Geremy can shed some light on it, but it looks like they've created some additional capabilities within the VDA to support adding custom virtual channels for performance reasons or resource reasons.
I'll be honest. So I neither do I, right? But I will say this: what this does is it basically makes the platform more extensible. Yeah. So what virtual channels would you want to add? I don't know. I don't know that I'm creative enough to think through that. But the whole idea that we can maybe extend the platform to support new things, I think is pretty neat. I think this is where you see, ISV partners, maybe some OEMs insert. I don't know. Maybe there's something that Agile could insert in that would be kind of unique to them. But I'm all a fan for making, the platform extensible. Especially, there's something else in this blog article that kind of in the same bucket. So we'll get to that. How's that?
Well, and I should have highlighted in the beginning. This is likely to be a 2-part, if not 3-part, podcast that we do here. It's just a ton to cover. Which, that's great to see that Citrix is taking their legacy product and making it more extensible, because that's what we need. That's what customers need. is seeing that that mainstream product from Citrix become even better than it was before, which is great. I guess I will highlight that ICA or HDX protocol, it's the channels all these years that have been in there by default, and the ones you can turn on, turn off, and then now additional channel capabilities. That's what makes that protocol the magical piece that makes Citrix.
It's pretty interesting. Most folks don't know what a virtual channel is. They just turn on Citrix and it works. But listen, just about anyone who's been in Director has seen the virtual channels. They've seen there's certainly the video channel, but there's an audio channel. There's a printing channel. I want to say 16 channels. There's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot. There we go. I always think of it, that big pipe, that one you see there that's got, it looks like fiber optic cable. That guy. Yep.
Yeah. And there's more than this now, but that's how you got to understand it. There's, channels happening within the ICA protocol that can be enablers for success. And also you can turn them off if they don't apply.
Mm-hmm. Or in the case of this blog post, add another one potentially.
Add your own. Bring your own ICA channel.
Oh my, I know what's about to happen. BYOICA. Bovica. Oh, there's a different.
Don't tell the Citrix marketing people that they might actually use it. All right, Geremy, you mentioned this a while ago. Hit over quick. The ability to blur your background using offloaded or teams within your VDI. Pretty self-explanatory.
Pretty straightforward. If you were running Teams within a virtual desktop or as a virtual app, you couldn't blur your background. Now you can. So it does require the most recent Workspace app and the VDA 2109, which is interesting, right? So this is a VDA that's been out for over a year, or I guess at a year, but it does require certain versions of Teams and probably the latest delivery controller with whatever policies.
The nice thing about Citrix and Teams and whatever the endpoint you're integrating is, it for the most part just works. You don't have to worry about like what I'm doing here with Zoom, where I have to have a certain version in the VDI and a certain version on the endpoint and have it turned on and enabled by my agile and my Citrix world. It just for the most part works.
Yeah.
All right, Bill, next one is Teams app sharing within a Linux VDI. I threw the word VDI on there. What do you think of this?
This is actually pretty neat. So it gives the user obviously it's pretty self-explanatory, but it gives the user the ability to share their screen, something that we do a lot in Teams and Zoom, whether it's on an endpoint or in a VDI, but this gives them the capability of being able to do that without, it used to be, I think on the Linux app, might have even been on the Windows app, and in Teams, some of the older versions, when you shared your screen, your video turned off. And then when you stopped sharing your screen, your video would turn back on. I believe that was Teams, one of the older versions. So that in Linux, I don't think you could even share your screen. And now this is going to give the end user the ability to do that.
And specifically Linux being the VDI portion of the story, Linux on the endpoint, I could do it.
Yeah.
So guys, and this, again, we're probably going to have multiple sessions on this. We're not going to get through it all in today's time. Why does this matter? Why does adopting Linux users as first-class citizens matter in 2023?
I feel like there is a larger answer to this that you've got teed up. I will say I don't see a lot of Linux VDA in my customer base in my geography, but when I talk to my peers in the central oil and gas, they use VDA Linux a lot, out west as well. So, I want to know the answer to that as much as you do, Andy.
Yeah, I think you hit it right on the head. We don't see it much, to be honest, within our project base, but I know we do have some oil and gas customers that have inquired of it out in Texas. And then I think it's also used overseas a lot because I think there's a lot more propensity for folks there to leverage Linux rather than Windows for whatever reason.
I'll be honest. There's a part of me, the nerd part of me, that likes to sort of tinker with Linux. I've got a couple of laptops that I'll fire up. I've got Ubuntu running, not Rocky Linux, but back in the day it was CentOS. I think they changed the name recently. But even in Azure, we've got our team tenant. We spun up Red Hat Enterprise in the past. So, but it scratches an itch for me for sure.
So historically, and I didn't really have an answer for this, but as you guys were talking, I'm thinking through it. And historically, it's been about those customers running, design applications that ran really well on Linux and didn't need the capabilities of Windows. But I also think it's about security, right? If I've got secure endpoints that are read-only Linux based, like agile, which I'm running right now, or if I've got that VDI that's also Linux based, and maybe it's more secure, maybe it's not than Windows, but it's certainly less attacked. There's a security element of that maybe oil and gas and energy sectors and people like that are going to start to adopt as much as they can, and we need to be there to support them with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty big use case in other areas for sure. And, honestly, when I first scrolled through this, I forgot that we were talking about the Linux VDA, but we've added a bunch specific to the VDA, and not just, not just platform support. So that first one there is literally just supporting the new versions of Linux. So, Ubuntu, Red Hat, and Rocky / CentOS, probably the biggest ones I've seen in the past. So it's certainly a refresh there, but seeing the other enhancements that we've seen on the Windows side come to Linux, you can just see where it's evolving.
So we'll just go through them, but you mentioned the support for the latest versions. Yes, that's great, really. I don't want to trivialize it because that's important. Session watermark enhancements. So, watermarking across the capabilities of Citrix sessions, and now we can do it in Linux.
Yeah, I mean, I should know whether or not we could do that in the past. I assume we could, but it sounds like we can insert image files into it as well, which is kind of neat.
Yeah. Next one on the list is desktop environment quick switching enhancement. What does that mean, Jeremy?
If you've never worked with Linux before, let's talk about Windows real quick. So when you log into Windows, you've got this sort of desktop UI you're looking at. That's all you get. That's the only version you ever get, right? You get the Windows 11 UI, you get the Windows 10 UI. That's it. In a Linux world, there are several different desktop views, UIs that you can select from. So I think the two most popular are KDE and GNOME, and there are an endless number that you can install on top of your Linux desktop. And it looks like we support the ability to quick switch between them, or at least as a user, assuming it's installed, select it yourself. So let's just say someone spun up a catalog of desktops and they made, KDE the default. It sounds like you can go in and pick GNOME, assuming it's installed on that instance. As an end user, maybe not having to put a request in to say I'd rather use GNOME than KDE, it's pretty neat.
This has got me wanting to break out an old machine and start installing Linux again.
Yeah, it scratches an itch, Andy, for sure.
Well, you know what? I can do a virtual machine and connect to it through Citrix now.
You could also do that. Yep.
Bill, support for additional user authentications methods in non-SSO scenarios.
Yeah, this, in Linux, typically you can join it to a Windows domain using a protocol called, or an add-in called Samba, and that used to be required. It may still be required, but users could not use different login names within sessions. And with this release, they can. Well, actually, I think they could, to be honest with you, but looks like they could log in with different usernames, but they couldn't use smart cards with the Linux VDA, and it looks like now they can.
Yeah. And that's always been a bugaboo for me, not understanding the Active Directory type LDAP relationship, but that's been solved for a while, and now there's additional options.
I'm just glad you said Samba, Bill, because in my head I always said Samba. Maybe there's a little dance that goes along with that. I don't know, but
yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's like 5 supported ways to add a Linux machine.
Yeah, there are other options. That's the one that
I'm
most familiar with. Yeah.
Yeah, this is what confuses people about open source. There's many ways to skin a cat.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, and that's part of the problem. That's the blessing and the curse all at the same time.
Yeah.
Hey, so this next one's super exciting to me from multiple fronts, but the support for KVM as a hypervisor to host the virtual desktops on. However, there's a call out at the bottom here that they don't support MCS as part of that. And I've been around that for a long time. Actually, currently working with another hypervisor solution, which I think Citrix, Geremy, should find extremely interesting if we make progress there, to bring MCS to a low-cost Linux hypervisor. But you want to cover this one, Geremy?
I mean, it sounds like we have a new dropdown. So when you go to create a hosting connection and you're managing VMs that sit on KVM, sounds like it's supported now. Now, It says MCS is not supported, but I would say yet. I'm not saying because I know that, but I just know, there's always like a version 1.0 of everything. And it sounds like this is probably like the initial release. So, now we support KVM as a hypervisor. I would imagine at some point, because we've done this across, other platforms, is, we'll add MCS eventually.
Well, that's good to know, right? Because I mean, that opens up, Citrix has XenServer, and XenServer has been amazing for a lot of companies, but it's not the future of most hypervisors and most customers' hypervisors. So bringing in KVM as an option, that'd be a big step.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is, I really think this is probably, this was coming. This has been coming a long time. I mean, arguably there are some third-party hypervisors that leverage KVM that are already supported. So, the one that comes to mind is AHV, which I think that had its roots in KVM, but that's supported fully for MCS and everything. So I think this is a natural extension of that.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm excited about it. Also doesn't stop what we're working on over here at XenTegra, where we're going to take a mainstream hypervisor that most people can't integrate with Citrix, and we're going to bring that to market probably in the next 6 months. So stay tuned. File, copy, and paste available for all supported Linux distributions. Sounds like something that you would have assumed was supported and working, but with there being so many deviations, variants of Linux, probably an easier thing to say than actually do.
You're probably right. I'm looking at those versions too, right? So knowing that the most recent versions of all of those are, 1804, that's not recent whatsoever. So this is a big deal. Sounds like we've got 5 years of work that just got caught up on. Copy and paste, that's a big deal.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about everybody's favorite topic, session recording, also known as Smart Auditor for people who've been around forever. What's this announcement, Bill?
This is really about security around the recordings. So with the 2209 VDA, they can restrict access to certain recordings. So this would be, I think, particularly in a regulated environment, or really any environment, you're not going to want just anybody or any admin to be able to access session recordings. You want to break it up and say, this person is the only person, or this group is the only group that can access recordings made by HR, or this group is the only one that can access recordings made of sessions that deal with finance, et cetera. So I think before it was not as granular. Now it appears to be getting more granular.
Right. Yeah, imagine, using the word admin, what does that mean? Doesn't necessarily mean IT admin.
Right.
It could be an HR person. It could be, it could be a compliance person. It could be a security person, who knows? But,
right.
Being able to do some role-based access for recordings is pretty neat.
All right. Next session talks about REST APIs for CVAD. Again, keep in mind, we're talking about the on-premises platform here. Geremy, why is this important to customers?
Well, so when you think about, SDKs, you think about APIs and how products integrate with other products. REST APIs are how they're doing that these days, right? So these XML files that define, what can and can't be done, I think it's just like modern development. And so it's kind of nice to see we finally extended and updated the platform to support REST APIs, because I think most developers, that's what they're looking for when they're looking to integrate with Citrix. They're not looking to the traditional software development kit, the SDK. So this is kind of a neat, I'm not a developer, so I can't dig in and tell you, but this is how the cloud works. So even though we're talking about an on-prem product, the cloud is leveraging REST APIs for this interaction between software platforms. So this is kind of neat to see.
Well, as a partner of Citrix and a partner of ServiceNow, we're looking forward to every opportunity to be able to pull data from one platform into an aggregator like ServiceNow and be able to digest it and make motions and decisions based on the centralizing of that data. Bill, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to point out the last sentence in that first paragraph there. Developers can program the automation systems once, and then it can work across cloud, on-prem, and hybrid. So this is really, I think what they're doing here is the REST API capabilities already exist in the cloud, and they're bringing them to the on-prem environment so that developers don't have to write different code in theory for different platforms. They're unified.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a powerful tool for customers, partners like us, as well as other vendors that want to play along in this space. All right, next section talks about updates and key integrations with leading public cloud providers, new Citrix capabilities on Microsoft Azure to start with. significantly reduce storage costs for powered down VMs. Cloud is awesome. Public cloud is awesome, but potentially it could be very expensive. I often think about the idea that I've got my house hooked up to the city county water, and if the break in the line is on my side of the meter, well, guess who's responsible for paying that? Even though I didn't have anything to do with breaking it. Got to be on top of our costs when we start talking about public cloud and consumption of things. The first one, Geremy, reduction, significantly reduced storage costs for powered down VMs.
So let me start by saying, before we get to this, we're talking about public cloud providers. So when I first read this blog, I thought we were specifically talking about like the CVAD on-premises product. But all of these things here, even though they're cloud enabled, would be relevant to an on-premises solution or a DaaS solution by default. So Citrix hosting the management plane. But if you're an on-premises customer running 2209 with hybrid rights installed, you would see this too, right? So now you can install, VDA sitting in the cloud. So in this first one here,
hey, Geremy, real quick though. So with CVAD, without hybrid rights, you can't really connect to public clouds. But if you have hybrid rights, then you get to connect to public clouds from your on-premises CVAD platform, right?
Correct. So if you're just running a standard on-premises CVAD solution, so you're not running hybrid rights, there's a license file that you've downloaded and installed, so that your on-premise environment knows you're not hybrid aware, right? So if you try to register a VDA that's sitting in a public cloud, it just won't register. So I forget the exact event ID, you can go look up, but either way, it just won't register. And so you have to have that hybrid rights license. Inside the license file, there's some code, there's a line of code that says, hey, this is a hybrid rights file, and that's how it knows the difference. But you're correct.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So it still applies.
Still applies, very much applies, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I've got my DaaS or I've got my CVAD on-prem, and I want to make sure that I'm not paying for stuff while I'm not actively using it. Storage is one of those.
Storage is one of those, right? So you can spin up a brand new instance type in Azure. Out of the gate, you get to define what kind of storage you want that instance to have. And a lot of folks, in fact, I think it defaults to premium SSD. And once it's created, I think it's been a challenge in the past to change that storage type. Sounds like if you turn off the VM, you can go change the storage type to something a little bit less expensive, which is pretty important. So you don't have to redeploy your machine catalog.
And Geremy, does anybody deploy desktops on standard H hard drives these days, or is it all SSD?
You know what? I'll say this. I'm testing PBS in Azure right now, and we're doing it entirely with standard HD, entirely with standard HDDs, right? So not SSD whatsoever.
Yeah. Because
we're only using that hard drive for some cache. In fact, PBS in Azure defaults to RAM cache with overflow to disk.
Right.
And so we don't necessarily need fast disk. So there's a big cost savings there.
So Bill, as somebody who's neck deep in projects all the time, what do you see?
Almost entirely MCS. I don't think we've done that. We may have done one project with PBS in Azure, but the majority of the projects are MCS, and we're going to throw them on premium SSD 95% of the time. So this is huge for customers, because when that machine shuts down at 6, 7 o'clock at night, they can flip the bit on that from premium to standard. Because you remember in Azure, you shut the machine down, you're not paying for consumption, but you're still paying for that disk space that's being used by that machine, which in most cases is pretty minimal in an MCS environment. But imagine if you have some static desktops, persistent desktops deployed, the ability to flip that from premium to standard can result in a pretty extensive cost savings, depending, based on the number of VMs you have. Right. And literally it just flips it to standard. And then when you start it back up, right before it starts the machine, it flips it back to premium. So the charges differ significantly.
Right.
Pretty slick, actually. I didn't realize that. So it's automated then.
That's my understanding. That's my understanding. When a VM's powered down, I don't know whether I would doubt you're having to do it manually. I'm somewhat making an assumption here.
It seems like a bad use of resources if you have to do it manually.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that's interesting is this is my own view based on some stuff I've read. Standard HDD isn't really a hard drive. It's really a flag that Azure sets to reduce the amount of throughput. My understanding is that all of the disks in Azure are SSDs. They just have different tiers and different capacity and throughput levels, and they set the bits based on what you pay for.
That's interesting. Okay.
So I don't know how to respond to that. I'm either like, that's BS, or I'm like, oh, that's really smart. Which one?
I want to pop into the console and just see where that checkbox is, right? Because I want to figure out how that works. That's interesting.
Yeah, I do too. Mm-hmm.
Hey, Bill, did you have a moment of Geremy talking about labbing up PVS and Azure and using RAM cache and hard drives? Like, man, I want to go do that. I want to do that.
Yep, I did.
Yep. And then reality soaks in. You're like, oh, I can't do that. I don't have time for that. I guess what I'm saying.
That's the challenge.
All right. So guys, we're got about 10 minutes left. Again, this is going to be a part 1 of part 2, maybe 3, heck, maybe part 4, which is great to have this much content to cover. Hibernation support for Azure VMs. Bill, I guess we'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, this pretty much explains it in the title, but this is something that folks have asked for a long time, and this is just literally, instead of shutting the machine down, you can hibernate it, just like you've been able to do in the VM console for years. Is be able to hibernate a VM. Basically, it saves the memory state, and then when it starts back up, it's much quicker than starting from scratch and rebooting or booting. I don't think you have any storage savings here. You may have some compute savings. I would assume you do, but this is pretty significant, I think, for some customers where users want to get in late at night and they don't want to have to spend 2 or 3 minutes waiting for it to boot up. Although typically it's really not even that long. The other benefit of this is the ability to hibernate when you're in the middle of something and you save it, but you want to get right back with the same desktop settings, or not desktop environment, the windows that are open in the same place, or the same windows are open. The ability to hibernate the environment and then come right back into it without it having to stay running the whole time. That makes sense.
I'm assuming this is to save money, right?
Yeah,
that's the whole purpose of this. But the way I understood Azure consumption today is the only time you're saving money on an instance is when you shut it down and the resources have been deallocated.
Deallocated. Yeah, you're right. So they wouldn't be saving money here. You're right. Absolutely.
So that leads into, I mean, listen, this sounds neat, but like, what would be the use case for this? Is, I guess, my question.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'm asking you two, the smart guys. Are you asking yourself?
This is me thinking out loud, because of course customers are going to want to know how to save money and use cases and things like that. So listen, this is how my wheels turn sometimes, is, I'm trying to figure out how this would be useful to folks. And so maybe this is where we follow up on this in week 2 of the podcast.
Well, so Geremy, to be clear, you're saying the only way to deallocate things is when it's totally turned off. Just hibernating it would not be good enough?
Well, so I'm thinking through this, right? So when you power down a virtual machine or an instance in Azure from outside, the instance, meaning you didn't go shut down from within the instance, Azure will basically power down the VM, deallocate it, which means those resources are no longer allocated to your subscription, right? So they go back into the pool of resources that everyone uses, right? And at that point, you're not getting charged for anything other than the storage. So far, so good.
Yep.
But in this case, if we're simply hibernating, I got to assume that we're keeping the memory state, the storage state, those sorts of things, which means you can't deallocate unless you'll lose all those things, right? So this feature sounds like you're just kind of putting it to sleep, which is okay. I'm trying to figure out what I'm gaining by doing all of this. Because if it costs the same for me to hibernate versus to keep it running, why wouldn't I just keep it running? I don't know.
Yeah, it's a really good question. The last sentence of this says reconnect to the previous state of the VM. You could argue that just leave it running and I can reconnect to the previous state of the VM. So that's a good point.
Yeah, I guess I don't know enough about why just hibernation support in Azure. So this is how I figure out what to go research during the week.
Yeah, I'm with you guys.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. All right. Yeah. Check it out. Let us know what you come back with. This question you're going to have to answer for customers anyway. So not a bad thing to have to go find out. Support for Azure AD dynamic security groups for Azure AD joined machines. Geremy, go ahead.
Okay, so this is what I don't know what an Azure AD dynamic security group is right now. So not just that, but I usually think of security groups in the context of delivery groups, because that's usually how I'm assigning membership to that delivery group. So I don't know. This
Bill,
is another one.
Bill, is this something you think you have knowledge of?
General idea, but just based on reading it, I think that I'm with Geremy to some degree. I'm not entirely sure what an Azure AD dynamic security group is, but I think the point they're making here is if you have an Azure AD joined VM, you can assign your security groups to the delivery group based on its name. So you can say, I've got a delivery group with a certain name in it, and then anytime a VM joins that delivery group, it gets X permissions, or X security groups get assigned to it. It's almost like a group policy for security groups or something. That's basically what I could come up with based on the reading it.
I will say this though, having no idea what this means just yet. I am seeing a lot more interest in Azure AD joined VMs and Azure AD joined security scenarios. So, if anything, this kind of shows the direction Citrix is going in supporting non-traditional AD joined machines.
It's rounding it out. You're absolutely right. I see that a lot too, customers wanting to do Azure AD join or hybrid join machines.
Oh, I mean, it hadn't been that long ago where you could be an Azure user, but your machine had to be in some type of, non-Azure AD joined domain.
Right.
Now we're to the point where we can dynamically reassign groups, it looks like.
Yeah.
Always fun. Support for Azure VM extensions. Bill?
Yeah, this is the Azure Resource Manager, or the ARM template capability. You can add VM extensions to the catalog. There's a list of supported extensions apparently that can be enabled. And this is the ability to add them dynamically, I guess, when you create a machine catalog versus manually.
Yeah, Geremy? Some of the, so I couldn't help but click the link, right? And so some of the extensions are page file locations, page file settings, apparently some Azure throttling. Maybe that's a different section I've just rolled into, but there's some interesting stuff here. The fact you can do it on the fly is pretty neat.
But I think it's interesting that, we know what we know about all this and we do it all day, every day. It's a lot, right? And that's why we're putting this information out and showing that we don't know everything, and there's research to be done for next week. And, there's collaboration that needs to be done to figure out more about these features that are being introduced.
Yep.
I have two more we'll cover, and then we'll make this an end cap for part one. Trusted launch support for Azure ephemeral OS disk. You know what? At one point in my life, I could have told you what ephemeral meant. I think it means persistent. You guys tell me. But ephemeral, what does this trusted launch support for Azure ephemeral OS disk mean?
Oh my. So I just had someone on my team talk to me about ephemeral disk the other day in the context of PVS, and what he told me is ephemeral disks are cheap, but I won't say insecure, but the whole idea behind a TPM module is just that trusted launch, that trusted platform. In fact, it's required for Windows 11 machines. I didn't realize it was virtualized too, so that's neat. But I'm gonna have to research this a little bit.
I just looked up the definition for ephemeral because I always forget. It means something that lasts for a very short amount of time.
Which is probably why it's cheap. So you could spin this thing up, use it, turn it off, and it goes away.
Okay. So you don't have to worry about managing this storage. It's gone. And so it's off your payroll in a matter of X time.
Yeah. In fact, I just noticed that option during machine creation the other day for a for an MCS image or catalog. So that's interesting.
Interesting.
I think that's brand new to the MCS process.
All right, last one we'll cover: support for machine catalog creation from a different Azure subscription. Wow, Bill.
This is kind of interesting. This is really focused on having shared image galleries. So where the customer has created a bank of images, maybe Windows 10, Windows 11, maybe certain apps on them, and they've created them in one subscription, and they've stood up another subscription in their tenant, and they're leveraging that for a different use case, perhaps maybe as a security boundary or a governance boundary. But they want to be able to leverage those images that they built over in the other subscription. Historically, they'd have to literally move them manually. Now they apparently have the ability to connect to them, primarily from using PowerShell, looks like.
This is pretty slick. So in my head, I'm thinking about how this used to work on-prem, right? You had a desktop team who was building laptop images in their own little area. But you move this to the cloud, and you've got desktop teams still creating images, but they're doing it from within Azure, right? So what they would do is to sort of, to your point, Bill, you've got a governance, you got a security boundary where I'm going to give this team access to a cloud, some space. They're building images, but in order to get those images from one tenant or one subscription to another, it's a very manual process. Whereas now these guys can kind of build and tweak and do everything they need to and have their own shared image gallery the way they want it. And an administrator in a different subscription could basically just insight into the gallery, pull over what they need. And so it just makes it a little bit clean. So this is a really neat idea. I love this.
Yeah, me too.
Goes back to our conversation a while ago around those, test environments and having that flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, guys, we're out of time for today. So this was great. We only made it through a third of the content. So chances are there's going to be a part 3 coming after part 2. And maybe we'll recap some of the other stuff at that point in time, clarify any things that we feel like we missed. But guys, I appreciate it. And looking forward to talking more around this. I can't highlight enough that if it takes us 3 days, 3 1-hour sessions to cover what's new with the product, Citrix is clearly investing in this. And this is where they know their bread is buttered for the future.
And what a tease too, because there are so many good things coming up in the next session. There's some Google, some AWS. We talked about MCIX and app packaging the other day. So this will be pretty good, actually.
Yeah, you got the Microsoft stuff. We just covered public cloud integration with CVAD. We haven't really got into DaaS, but we think all this stuff applies there too. And Microsoft's just one of the 3 big players in the public space. And then there's all kinds of semi-private public clouds to be integrated with. It is truly a world of you decide your path. You pick your story that you want to be, and it's all gonna work and all gonna be supported.
Mm-hmm. All right, guys. Good sesh.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, guys. Thanks. We'll do it again next week.
All right. Thanks, Andy.